The national gangs, we do have some here in Tallahassee, but they are not very active at all.
Don't get me wrong, they're about the money. It's all about the green. So they are involved in crimes, but not as, you would say, Chicago.
Hi, I'm Dave Northway, the Public Information Officer for the Tallahassee Police Department and the host for today's episode of City Law, City Justice, the show that highlights the ins and outs of TPD and answers your questions about your city servants. Today's guests are from TPD's gang unit. These elite officers are patrolling our neighborhoods and visiting with our youth to identify and discourage them from falling into the gang life. Please welcome Sergeant Brian Davis and Officer Ray Garcia. Thanks for coming today.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
So, Mr. Davis, we were talking earlier before the show started about what exactly a supervisor does at TPD. You have 5 officers that you take care of as your staff. So what does that entail, being a supervisor as a sergeant?
Well, we still have the normal duties of a patrol supervisor.
What does that mean?
We're under patrol, which is part of the patrol division. So all the activities that patrol sergeant does or these guys do, we have to do those as well. Some of that we get pulled away from us, like calls for service. We don't have to deal with as much, so we focus on the gang issues. But while we're in the field, we still have to deal with the calls for service, the priority calls for service as well. Okay,
and a call for service for our viewers who may not understand what that means is?
A robbery in progress, a burglary in progress, something of that nature, shootings.
It's as simple as someone calling us and saying, I need a police officer to come to my house, and that's a call for service. Okay. And so the gang unit then tries to focus mostly on any activity that we have in the area, or?
Anything gang related, also to include the businesses they may be in, anything that makes them money, anything that they're involved in, we want to disrupt. As well as document the members that are involved or members that want to be involved, and those we call our clients. We try to keep track of our clients.
Okay. And Officer Garcia, we were talking earlier, you've been with the unit since its inception.
Correct, since October of 2005.
And it was supposed to be, in the beginning, just a temporary, if you will, unit. Tell us how that came to fruition.
Well, back in the summer of 2005, we began noticing a large amount of incidents that were involving some of our younger kids in the community. We were experiencing drive-by shootings, a lot of fights, a lot of team parties that were coming up that would transpire into these shootings and fights. As we looked into it further, we noticed that there was a trend among the gang life, the gang style. So the police department created a temporary unit. I believe it was 5 of us at the time, and our responsibilities at that time were to go out, find out who these kids were, if there were any adults involved, and then begin documenting all their information, what gang or gangs they belong to, and then monitor them on a daily basis when we came in for our shifts.
Okay, and obviously it wasn't temporary.
No.
We're still here 8 years later, I guess, now.
Going on 8 years.
And we've got, how many people do we have on the squad?
4 officers and myself.
4 officers and yourself full-time on the squad. And what are your hours? I mean, do you work varied hours? Do you work in the afternoons?
We have set hours, but we're very flexible. We'll come in anytime around noon to 10, but depending on circumstances, depending on clients we wish to monitor, we'll flex our hours.
Okay. Speaking of clients, I guess, Officer Garcia, what types of gangs? I'm a citizen and I'm watching TV and I watch a movie about gangs. I see the big ones. What types of gangs do we have in, or what are the names of them, or something like that?
Well, here in Tallahassee, we experience more what's called a hybrid type gang, and those are our neighborhood gangs. We have individuals that are from certain parts of the city, in certain neighborhoods, where they claim a name of a certain area within the neighborhood, and it transpires from there. The national gangs, we do have some here in Tallahassee, but they are not very active at all. Per se. We have some that do come up here to attend school, but they stay very low key, and we rarely have any problems with them. Now, some of our local gangs do take on some of the, for lack of a better word, traditions and lifestyles of the national gangs. They'll adopt a name of one of these national gangs and follow the I guess, philosophies of these gangs and what they represent in the gang world. So luckily for us, they're not very active as far as the national gangs, because if they were, I think we'd have a much more serious problem than we do right now. For the most part, that's how we deal with them as far as that goes.
All right, and Sergeant Davis, you mentioned monitoring our clients, meeting these potential gang members. What does that entail, monitoring them?
Oh man, these guys start their day for probably the first 2 hours going through 18 different resources, most of which we won't mention.
Nope.
But they follow their activities. We check up on them through the resources. They determine if they're on probation, parole, any arrests have been made, any recent activities, and then we follow up on that. Okay,
and how would you, I guess, be identified as one of our clients that fits into this category then? Is this something, Officer Garcia, that we have a process for? How does that happen?
Well, the state of Florida set up a statute, 874.03, which deals strictly with gangs and how they are validated. There are 11 pieces of information that need to be gathered in order for an individual to be validated as a criminal gang member in the state of Florida. Of those 11, they have to meet at least 2 or more to be validated. If they only meet 1, it's an associate. With the police department ourselves, with our gang unit, we tend to look at not just the 1 or 2 validation points. We try to go beyond that to make sure that we have an individual that is truly in or part of a gang, because we do have kids on the peripheral that do emulate what they see either from other individuals in the neighborhood or siblings, and they're not part of the gang, but they're trying to emulate it. So when we do come across an individual, we do our homework as far as doing background, checking background information on them and making sure that they are truly part of that gang.
Okay, and so once they would be validated, then, let's say now I'm a validated gang member in the city of Tallahassee. The validation then has some repercussions to it, I'm guessing.
Yes.
That once, if they're involved in a crime or something like that. You want to
There's enhancements with sentencings on crimes. You're arrested, you're found guilty on a crime, then you will receive enhancements during that sentencing period. And that's where it's very important, as Ray was saying, to make sure we do have the people that are actively involved in gangs properly documented versus somebody who's emulating or just pretending. We want to make sure people we label or call a gang member are indeed a gang member.
Right, so we want to make sure the ones who are, we're going to put onto a validation group, that they actually are living the gang life and someone who's...
They actually also get entered in the state and national databases.
Okay.
So it's a very serious thing that we do.
Right. We don't take it very lightly at all.
Once you become validated in the eyes of the state of Florida, you carry that for life. So it's a very serious situation that some of these guys don't realize until it's too late. But they are living that lifestyle. They are partaking in the criminal activity that these gangs are doing, and that's just a repercussion.
Okay. Well, we're coming up to our break. I'm going to ask if you would please stay with me, maybe, and discuss a little bit more in depth about what's going on.
Sure.
All right.
All right. Well, we'll be right back on City Law, City Justice.
A woman in this country is battered every 15 seconds.
Women living with disabilities have a 40% greater risk of experiencing domestic violence.
Nearly 8 million days of work per year are lost as a result of domestic violence, the equivalent of 32,000 full-time jobs.
The leading cause of injury to women ages 15 to 44 is domestic violence.
Each year, about 324,000 pregnant women in this country are battered by their intimate partners.
Most domestic violence offenses are not reported to law enforcement, and sometimes it's just too late.
Every day, 3 women are murdered at the hands of a current or former partner. Help is here. Call the Florida Domestic Violence Hotline or visit fcadv.org for more information or to find your local certified domestic violence center.
Hi, welcome back to City Law, City Justice. Today we're talking with our gang unit members. We have still with us Sergeant Brian Davis and Officer Ray Garcia. Both decided to stay on and talk to us for another segment. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Our pleasure.
So we were talking a little bit before about validating a person by Florida statute.
Correct.
How many people have we validated in Tallahassee, Officer Garcia?
We have approximately 243 active gang members and associates that meet the criteria for validation in the state of Florida.
All right, and we were also talking about the population during the break. I think it's somewhere around 180,000 people.
In that ballpark.
In that ballpark. So it's a pretty small percentage of active people who are participating in gang-related activity.
Correct.
Correct.
So if I'm a citizen watching this, I hear the number 243. Do I have reason to be alarmed by this, or?
No, nationally I say it's a very small population, or even percentage of our population is small. Of those, it's like 18 different groups. That includes some national sets as well as the local sets.
And by set, you mean a
gang,
a group of
set,
gang.
yeah. Those that are involved in those activities are usually not a gang activity.
Okay.
When they get in trouble or we hear things about somebody being a gang member involved in something, it's the individual that has committed an act, not as a gang member. But it gets notoriety, no doubt. You throw the word gang out or gang member involved in something, yes, it needs to be looked at. But we're not finding a lot of gang-targeted activities where a gang will go to another gang and commit a violence, or a gang will organize themselves to go do something. Don't get me wrong, they're about the money. It's all about the green. So they are involved in crimes, but not as you would say Chicago, gang on gang, where you have a gang purposely targeting an area.
Okay. So you mentioned it's about the money. What are some of the crimes that we see associated with the gangs, Officer Garcia?
Well, burglary, auto theft, petty theft, carjackings, drug sales, and robbery are the biggest ones. The drug sales would have to be number one as far as that goes. It's the easiest and the quickest as far as maintaining their anonymity to an extent for that trade.
Right, right. And our officers are trying to combat that, obviously, with within our gang unit.
Oh, yes. Absolutely. And with that being said, you know, 4 guys here are dealing with some of the most violent criminals we have, from juveniles to adults just coming out of DOC. Dealing with the hybrids is some of the most dangerous. All these juveniles have no idea what they're doing and have no idea the repercussions.
So a hybrid, you're speaking about the hybrid gang, not a national gang? Or?
Correct. A hybrid gang is a group of people taking on a gang identity, not necessarily associating themselves with a national gang.
Okay.
National gangs have a lot more discipline, as we spoke about a little earlier. There's a lot more structure. Hybrid gangs, no, there's very little structure, very little discipline. They're the most violent and the most dangerous we have to deal with.
Okay. And speaking of coming out of, you said juveniles and coming out of Department of Corrections, which is jail, what are the ages that we're seeing? Are we seeing, 5-year-olds? Are we seeing 50-year-olds? What are we talking about?
Now, our youngest at one point in time was 11. He is now 14 or 15, and our oldest probably around 23 to 24 years old. But the average is anywhere between 15 and 18 years.
So it's a young man's game.
Yes.
And as they grow older, do they tend to get out of the life, so to speak?
They tend to just kind of distance themselves as they get older. I've talked to some that say that they're not kids anymore and they're not doing that, but the lifestyle continues as far as the crime. Not so much as participating with the gang itself, but they do continue the lifestyle of crime, committing the crimes.
Okay. And so how does one get involved in a gang? Is it taught from parent to child? Is it something you see in the neighborhood? Are you seeing for the trends? Where is that coming from?
In some cases, parent to child. We've seen that on quite a few. In other cases, it's simply a child that has no other place to go or no other direction, and they fall in with a bat. It's a combination of both. I don't really think we can label one way or the other.
Some it's family tradition. They have brothers and sisters, even parents that are have been in the gang or are currently in the gang. The neighborhood that they're growing up in, if they know guys that are in the gang, they're gonna start, falling into that and being brought in. to further the gang. A lot of them don't have that family structure,
Right.
and they look towards the gang for that, and it draws them in.
So the gang at times will actually provide them a family structural environment, or
They like
a
to-
semblance of family, I guess?
They like to have that semblance of family, but when they get in trouble, there's nobody there for them.
Right.
They're not out there to bail them out, to take care of their family or siblings if they are locked up. There's nothing like that. Like a true family would be there to help you. They're not there to help you.
It just doesn't
They're
happen.
there to use you.
No.
Right, right. And so they go to DOC, like you had said earlier, Department of Corrections, get into jail. They're a resource for us, I'm guessing, to
Absolutely.
kind of help us out.
One of the things we do is on a monthly meeting. It involves DOC, it involves intelligence officers from the surrounding agencies. All get together, talk about who's coming out, who's going in, activities that we've seen. DOC is very good at providing us with information that we need to be on the lookout for people that are coming out that we need to start paying attention to.
So there's a lot of behind-the-scenes work. It sounds like you're not actually, constantly out there looking for a gang member. There's a lot of intelligence gathering, computer work, sharing of information between different agencies, which is the key to making this a successful project.
It's half intelligence and half field work.
That's excellent. So, if I'm going to be getting into a gang, let's say, how do you start that process? I mean, you don't wake up one day and say I'm going to be a gang member. It doesn't happen. I mean,
Well,
I wouldn't even know where to go tomorrow if I want to go.
It can be as simple as knowing somebody in the gang, and they say, okay, you can be part of the gang. Other gangs have more stricter process on how to get in, being beaten in, where they're beaten up by members of the gang for a certain amount of time. There's some that are allowed in just because they have other family members that are part of the gang. And when it comes to females, they are sexed in. That's one of the ways they can be brought into a gang also. So it's just, it depends on the gang itself and what they feel is necessary. One other thing that I forgot to mention is doing a criminal act, whether it be a burglary, a drive-by shooting, a robbery, one of those set crimes that you have to commit in order to get into the gang may be one of the things you need to do or have to do to join.
Okay. Well, you've been with us for 2 segments. We're wrapping up this segment. Is there anything in a couple of quick words you would want our citizens to know about Tallahassee and the gang unit itself?
While it may be perceived as a gang problem, these guys are on top of it. A lot of the activities that we're seeing, they involve gang members, absolutely, as it would involve any other criminal. These guys do a very good job of keeping track of them, keeping in touch with them, and deal with them as we need to.
Right. We have lots of people who are committing crimes in Tallahassee. There is a small percentage that happen to be committing crimes and are gang members. We do not see that large, from the media perspective, of gang-on-gang activity that you see in movies that are portrayed in the big
No,
time.
when you think of that, you think of Chicago, New York, or the movies, and we don't have that kind of issue.
Right.
We do have some.
We have a small group that is committing crimes, and we're monitoring them.
Correct.
Right. And of those groups, it's from females to bikers. So it's just not the local member.
Great. Well, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
And we will be right back on City Law, City Justice. And welcome back to City Law, City Justice. I now have 2 of our officers from our gang unit. Officer Brian Perry and Officer Michael Wright joining us. Thank you for being here. Appreciate it. So we talked about the overview of the gang unit, what we do, what our philosophies are. Maybe we can talk a little bit about our day-to-day life as a gang unit officer. Mr. Perry, any ideas on what we do?
Well, we do a lot. Most of the time our days start with emails. We get a lot of emails from other units within the department, whether it be the investigation unit, other agencies, school resource officers from the sheriff's office. We'll get a lot of emails because they'll bring up a name, and when you run somebody, it'll come up with a gang hit. So they'll ask us if we know these people, if we know they're in a gang. They'll have, like if a crime's committed, a robbery or a burglary, and they have surveillance, they'll have photos of those people, and a lot of time gang members are involved in crimes. So they'll send those photos to us and ask us if we know anybody, and a lot of times, you know, we do get lucky, and a lot of them are familiar to us.
Okay. Mr. Wright, once you're done checking your email, done at the office, what do we do next?
Well, to kind of add on to some of what he was talking about, you know, the validation process, like our Officer Garcia was talking about, when we have the data sheets that come up that identify some of the crimes or some of the activities that the gang members have been in, we do update those validation sheets, you know, almost daily. So a lot of that plays in. We get regular emails and stuff from Department of Corrections. So all of the gang members who were either on probation or were in prison and identified as a gang member in prison, they all come back and they come to Tallahassee, and then it's my job to track those guys, find out where they are, and then go visit them on a regular basis as well. So we kind of stay in their face, and we stay active with them.
Right, checking on them.
Yeah.
Hello, we're still here. We're not
still
going anywhere.
Here. We know where you are.
We know where you are. Everything is.
We even do we do probation checks with the juvenile probation officers. They'll have a list of people they check monthly, and we'll ride around with them. You know, and check the people. That way you know who they are, you know where they live, you make contact with their parents.
Right.
Other than doing that, we're also, you know, we go out to our cars, we hit hot spots, you know, known areas that gangs hang out. We'll follow up on, you know, graffiti. A lot of times we get graffiti complaints on the hotline or emails about graffiti, and they'll want to know if it's just somebody that's a tagger that's just painting it, or if it's actually gang graffiti. And while you're also out there, you know, we'll respond to calls for service. You know, if something happens in an area, like we'll hear, you know, a fight at a school or a group of kids involved in something at a park, you know, usually there's a possibility it'll gang related. So we'll usually go to those types of calls for service as well. Okay,
and you had mentioned graffiti. We talked about that on our last show. Some of the graffiti then we're seeing is gang related, is that true?
It's most of the graffiti we have in Tallahassee is taggers. It is just kids going out, putting up their name or their tag on people's buildings, and it is just strictly criminal mischief. Every now and then, in some of our areas where gangs are more predominant, we do see some gang graffiti, and that's what we generally tend to follow up on and document.
Okay. We've talked a little bit about what you do on a day-to-day basis. Let's talk a little about prevention, because I know part of your job, quite a big part of your job, is working on prevention. I've accompanied you with you guys when you go into the schools and you've talked to the students. Can we tell the public a little bit about that?
Well, you know, it really kind of fits well into the TPD's motto: see something, say something, do something. You know, if you're a student in a school and you see either some kind of gang involvement, tell somebody, tell your parents, tell the principal, tell your school resource officer, just anybody. Do something to start preventing that ongoing gang activity from happening in our schools. Parents, one of the, Chapter 874, as Officer Garcia mentioned, it defines a gang as a formal or informal group or organization, 3 or more people, whose primary activity is commission of a crime or delinquent acts. They must have, identifying, either they all wear the same bandana or they're all wearing the same blue shirts, and they do this on a daily basis. So, identifying marks or tattoos or clothing. Right. So, parents, if you're at home and you start noticing your son wears the same bandana hanging out of his pocket every day, or he's always wearing the same red hat, and then his friends come over and they're all wearing red hats, so they all have that same identifying things, and then you start to notice that they're getting in trouble or their grades in school are falling, you know, you need to be aware of that. You need to find out, you know, what avenue you can take to either identify are they in a gang, you know, catch it then.
Right. The parents are going to be the ones that are going to be our eyes and ears that are out there, seeing these kids start to fall into this lifestyle.
Right. They can even look for symbols. Like a lot of times, if we make contact with someone or stop them, and they're suspected of being a gang, you know, if they're leaving school and they got their book bags with them, their backpacks, whatever, you can look on their folders. I mean, what are they drawing?
Right.
I mean, they'll draw that, like we were talking about graffiti. Instead of painting it, they draw it. You know, they'll have it on pieces of paper they carry with them. They'll put it on their books. You know, like a 5-point. There's all different kinds of graffiti, or you know, you can look online at any gang website and it'll show you all the different symbols that
things
they
that
use.
parents could be looking for. Absolutely. So one of the things we had talked about was you going into the school systems. Do you go and talk to the whole school? Do you talk to just a certain amount of the kids? How does that work?
Well, recently we did a gang rally that, and I don't remember all the partners, but I know the Sheriff's Department was included with it, several units with our department. We went and did a gang rally. We actually had 2 of the gentlemen that I met while doing the DOC, Department of Corrections, probation checks. These are guys that, you know, they did go down the wrong path. They did get involved in gangs, and their lives, you know, they're starting over at 30 years old. We had those guys come in as guest speakers, and they spoke to the, you know, I think it was all the 4th graders, you know, at one of the schools. We've got another one set up for the end of this month that we're going to go into another school and speak to a couple of the grades at one time, and really just discourage, you know, the dead end that a gang is, and that's all it.
Right. In the end, gang life is going to lead you to probably one of 2 places: either jail or
underground.
Underground, exactly. Probably not someplace that anybody needs to be. So I think the prevention is a big part of it, absolutely.
And as Officer Garcia had said earlier, you know, once you get documented, you're documented for life. So when you start looking for jobs, I mean, those things are going to come up.
Right. When they're adults, and if they get out of the life and they need to start getting regular paying jobs, for lack of a better word, they're going to have a trouble, because they are labeled that, unfortunately. So I think what we can get from this segment is that parents need to pay attention to their kids. Number one, absolutely. Look for signs of change, and then also that if you get labeled a gang member, you're going to be a gang member for the rest of your life, and that's not something that you need in your all right, we're coming up to the end. Is there anything you'd like to tell our viewers about the gang unit that they don't know about?
I think you've covered most of it.
All right.
Thank you.
Well, I appreciate everybody for coming in tonight. I know that it's very busy out there for us. We appreciate that you're protecting our community. I think the one thing that I would want our community to understand is that it is a very small percentage of people who are committing these gang-related crimes, and they are not actually gang on gang. And what we're doing is we're monitoring it, and it's well within under control.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. You agree with that?
Yeah, we don't have an episode of Gangland in Tallahassee, you know, and I think a lot of people see that, and I've even had people comment to me that, you know, well, is this how Tallahassee is, you know, and it's absolutely not. You know, that's sensationalized for TV, and that is not Tallahassee.
Okay. Well, I really appreciate you taking time out of your busy day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We will see you next time on City Law, City Justice.
Thank you.